This is Gritty and Green, a podcast for truly urban gardeners. I'm your host and friendly neighborhood master gardener, Meredith Nutting. In this episode, we're talking about pests, who they are, and what to do about them. We'll hear from my youngest guest so far, Noah Raven, the founder of Monarch Defenders, and then answer one of your gardening questions. So, let's get growing. No matter who you are, what you plant, where you garden, and why you're doing it, how you deter the pests that attack your plants is on every gardener's mind. Much like the word weed, the word pest is a little subjective. A weed is a plant that a gardener didn't purposefully plant, and a pest is a critter a gardener didn't intend to invite. Pet Extension defines pest as an organism living and growing where they are not wanted, and one that can cause damage to plants, human structures, or other creatures, including crops that are grown for food. So this technically includes things like aphids crawling all over my tomato plant, but also my neighbor's cat digging up my garden bed, cabbage worms eating all of your brassica, and monarch caterpillars eating all of your milkweed, squirrels biting into each of your tomatoes, and native carpenter bees boring into the side of your house. All of these critters cause damage, but even the most militant gardener doesn't want to kill them all, especially my neighbor's cat. Fortunately, we master gardeners have a method to determine if there is a pest, what the pest is, and how to safely get rid of it. To start, you have to know that there are 4 types of pests in your garden. The first type are other plants, the weeds. As I said, weeds are just plants that a gardener didn't plant purposefully. It can be something aggressive that takes over, but it also could be a tomato that's self-seeded in your compost. Getting rid of weeds is fairly easy. You identify them and you pull them out. I did a whole episode on weeds last season that you can go back to and find, so I'm going to skip them here. Moving on to the second type, we're going big, vertebrates, animals with a backbone. In the city, those are primarily squirrels. Now, this history might be a bit frustrating to us gardeners, so beware. Gray squirrels were pretty much pushed out of all the cities until 1847, when they were, for some reason, reintroduced back into the city of Philadelphia in Franklin Square. And now they're everywhere, and they're probably the biggest menace to most gardeners. From what I hear in my garden workshops, squirrels do everything from digging up spring bulbs to clear-cutting kale patches and generally just trashing gardens, pots, and window boxes. But we also have mice, rats, raccoons, opossums, and birds. Larger gardens in the cities even have groundhogs. That pretty much makes up our vertebrate pests in Philadelphia. But then there's a much larger group of pests, invertebrates. Those are all the insects, arachnids, and gastropods that live in our gardens. Those are your cutworms, your aphids, your spiders, and slugs. When folks think about garden pests, this is what they're thinking about. And finally, the fourth type are diseases. According to Pet Extension, diseases are when a living or non-living entity interferes with the normal functions of a plant over a period of time. Diseases are often caused by a microscopic worm called a nematode, a fungus, a bacteria, or a virus. So, you notice something about your plant. Maybe it's wilted, or the leaves are torn apart, or brown spots are appearing. Something is wrong. What do you do? Okay, put down the pesticides. Now gently back away. First of all, do you even know what pesticides are? Pesticide is an umbrella term for substances used to control pests. If your pests are weeds, you use an herbicide. If your pests are rats or rodents, you use rodenticides. Insects, insecticides, and fungus, fungicides. Now, people have been dealing with pests since the dawn of agriculture. They've used all sorts of methods to outwit and outthink their nemesis. But they also used chemicals in the forms of minerals and extracts. Starting around 4,500 years ago, farmers used compounds like copper and sulfur and plant extracts like nicotine to kill and deter the pests in their gardens. Modern-day chemical pesticides weren't invented until World War II, and even though they peaked in the 1980s, their use has started to trend down. Why? because they can be harmful to the environment, and overusing them can create resistance in the insects, weeds, and fungus that they're trying to target. In short, they are a great tool when needed, but they are often overused, they aren't one size fits all, and a lot of times you just don't need them. So seriously, say goodbye to the pesticides and hello to Integrated Pest Management, IPM for short. This is a common sense approach to get rid of pests that is also effective and environmentally sensitive. Let's explore it with a couple case studies. These might be specific, and you may not see these problems in your garden, but the method is the same no matter what kind of pests you're dealing with. So, get ready to put on your Sherlock hat and break out your magnifying glass. A little scene setting. It's a beautiful spring day. The sun peeps through your window, waking you up. Your first task of the day while your coffee is brewing is to check your cool weather crops, kale, Swiss chard, and peas. The plants are still there and still as big and lush, but there are holes in the leaves. First thing you should do is stop and take a breath. Don't do anything rash. You need to figure out what is causing these holes, and so you need to observe. Holes in leaves can be caused by insects or gastropods, that's your slugs, or even birds and squirrels. So look at your plants closely. Which plants are bothered? The kale and the chard, but not the peas? Interesting. Any discoloring on the leaves? No. Any wilting? No. Look at the tops and the bottoms of the leaves. Closer. Closer. Do you see any tiny little worms or insects? Ah, yes. A green caterpillar is munching on your leaf. Well, my friend, you have white cabbage moths. Actually, these are the caterpillars, the larvae, sometimes called cabbage worms. Okay, so now that you know what you're dealing with, you can move on to step 2 of the integrated pest management. Monitor the pest activity and determine your action threshold. Is this just one caterpillar, or do you have an infestation? If it's just one or two, maybe nothing is needed to be done. Chances are these 2 little cabbage worms will go on to feed a baby bird as part of our dynamic ecosystem. But maybe your entire kale plant is almost decimated and you believe your Swiss chard is next. You may decide you don't care so much, or you may decide to go all in. So we're going to start our treatment. In integrated pest management, we go from least ecologically harmful up. So, just like your doctor will tell you with your own health, prevention is key. The first thing we want to do as gardeners is to create an environment around our plants that just isn't ideal for our pests. This is where we use our knowledge and our tools. Maybe this is planting a species that the pest just doesn't like, or planting when the pest isn't around, or stopping the pest from getting to the plant. All of these methods are cultural control. Back to your kale plant. You see those white moths flying around? Well, they laid the eggs that became the caterpillars that ate your kale. To prevent them from laying even more, you want to put out a barrier, a netting, or a floating row cover that can cover your plants so the moths can't reach them. It's basically a lightweight material that you set up over your plants to create a physical barrier. It still lets light, air, and moisture in, but keeps things like moths out. No moths, no eggs, no caterpillars, no damage. But obviously you already have some caterpillars on your plants and the row covers aren't going to stop them. So on to our physical control. This is just physically removing the cabbage moth caterpillars. So pulling them off and either squishing them or tossing them away from your plants for another critter or bird to find. And then it's time to look for the eggs. They are small, yellow, and oblong shape, often laid on their own. You can just gently squish or scrape them off your plant. Try it and keep track of how many you saw and removed. You'll check back every day or every 2 days and repeat. Hopefully you'll see the numbers of caterpillars decrease to 0. And that will let you know that what you are doing is working. But now let's say that this isn't working for you. Maybe squishing bugs is just too gross, or checking your kale every few days is too time consuming. Next on our list of integrated pest management controls is biological. Now this is where our parasitic wasps come in. If you haven't heard about them, go check out the last episode of Gritty and Green, Plant Friends, to learn all about why wasps are a gardener's best friend. Biological controls are predatory or parasitic critters that naturally manage your pest issue. It works best when these predators are already around to prevent the pests from getting the upper hand in the first place. And you can encourage this by providing a natural habitat through planting native plants, creating areas for them to nest or hibernate in, and avoiding chemicals that will kill them. You can also purchase them online as biological control. This mainly works with predatory nematodes, a microscopic worm that you introduce into your soil. But you may also see ladybugs and praying mantises for sale. I really do not suggest that you purchase them. First of all, the ones for sale are usually an introduced species that are already causing ecological damage, and now you're helping them. Second, if they are a native species, they're often being poached from an area that also needs them. And third, if your yard doesn't already have these beneficial predatory insects, it's likely that you haven't created the right habitat yet. Introduce a predatory insect with wings into a mediocre habitat, and they'll likely just fly away. So, trust the process. If you plant it, they will come. It's not hard to attract helpful insects to do the dirty work for you. Okay, so now you've tried your cultural and physical and biological controls and they have not worked. Well, then and only then do we break out the chemical control. That would be your insecticides. We are going to start with a chemical that will do the least environmental damage. That means that it targets the insect that you're going for, in this case the cabbage moth, and it won't be lingering around the environment for a long time. For cabbage moths, Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT for short, works well. That's a bacteria that creates proteins that are toxic to some insects, including cabbage moth caterpillars. You'll want to read the manufacturer's instructions carefully on how to apply it to make sure that it's effective. And then after that, the final step to any integrated pest management solution is monitoring. Check back and make sure it worked. Want to do another one? Okay. You want to plant squash, but the last time you did, you got squash vine borers. Unseen by the gardener, it feeds in the center of the stem for about 4 to 6 weeks, eventually blocking water from going through the plant. Gardeners usually only know what's going on when the huge, beautiful squash plant suddenly collapses with wilted leaves. By then, it is much too late. The larvae then exit the plant, go underground to form a cocoon that they'll emerge from the next summer. So knowing that, and knowing the enemy is half the battle, what are you going to do? Well, first we're going to start with prevention, cultural control. Because in this hypothetical situation, your squash was infected last year and the squash vine borer overwinters in the soil, you want to rotate your crops. Don't plant squash in that area this year. Rotating crops is just good practice in general for all plants because it helps with pest control and soil health. We could plant a squash that we know isn't attractive to the squash vine borer, like butternut squash, cucumbers, melons, and watermelons. Planting varieties that are not going to be affected is also part of IPM. But there is hope if you're still set on planting squash that are attractive to the borer. We know that there is one generation of squash vine borers, and we know they come out in late June and early July. We'll want to make sure that our squash are unavailable to these wasps. You can either do this by covering your squash plant like we did with the kale, or waiting to plant your squash until a little bit later in the season. Squash plants need to be visited by pollinators in order to produce fruit, so you only want to have the covers on them when the squash vine borer is around. And if you like the plan to plant your squash late, you want to make sure you're not waiting too long so that your squash still has plenty of time to grow. So whichever method you choose, you need to know that the squash vine borer has emerged from the soil, found nowhere in your garden to lay its eggs, and has moved on. You can do this in a couple of ways. First, you can plant a sacrificial squash at the end of May, early June, as recommended by most seed packets, and leave it uncovered. This squash exists to attract the squash vine borer. You'll need to inspect the plants for signs of the borer, looking out for orange and black moths flying around your squash plants, or checking the stem for signs that the borer larvae are infecting it. This usually looks like sawdust coming out of the vine. That's the frass, caterpillar poop, and a sure sign that something is in there. Now, if you don't want to plant a sacrificial squash, you can also figure out when the squash vine borers have come and gone by trapping them. Traps available for sale attract the male and female adults with pheromones. You'll need to be checking these because what you're really trying to find out is when the moths have arrived and when they have left. Once you see that you are no longer trapping the adult moths, that's probably a safe time to plant your squash. Hopefully all that cultural control will work. But if it doesn't, and you find evidence that your squash is starting to succumb to the wilting caused by the squash vine borers, you might be able to save your plant by using a sharp, clean knife to gently cut a slit in the vine. Not all the way through, just to the middle of the vine. Slice up the plant until you locate the borer, and then kill them. Make sure you get them all. Then mound up the soil over the cut area of the stem and water a lot. Perhaps new roots will grow and your plant will continue to produce way too many squash. No promises, but it's worth a shot. Finally, we have our chemical solutions. These aren't ideal because pollinators that are visiting your squash at the same time will be affected by the insecticides that you use. So if you do choose to use a chemical, you have to make sure that they're effective by targeting the squash vine borers and following the instructions carefully. Okay, let's do one more quickly. You're out enjoying the warm summer breeze in your garden and you look over and you see what looks like a splotchy white powder all over the lower shaded leaves of your eggplant. There's no sign of insects or any other issues. Identifying the causes of spots and discoloration on leaves can be tricky, and it can be a process of elimination. Fortunately, in this case, very few things cause a white powdery substance on leaves. It's a type of fungus called powdery mildew. It can affect a lot of different plants, and it is seen a lot on the large leaves of squash plants too. The fungus is spread by wind or splashing water, or even spread on your clothes as you're moving through your garden. It loves hot, humid environments, but not too hot, and it survives by stealing nutrients from the plant it's growing on. And at the same time, it blocks the leaves from being able to photosynthesize. If it's really bad, it can eventually kill the plant. So now that we have identified it, we're on to step 2, cultural control, using our knowledge and our tools. We know that the fungus is spread by wind, splashing water, or on our clothes. We can't really do anything about the wind, but we can try to avoid splashing water on the leaves of our plants by watering close to the soil. We can also be mindful of what our clothes and gloves are touching when we move from one plant to another. We can make sure that we've spaced our plants apart and they're in the proper amount of sunlight. Healthy plants can survive a lot of different pests. Powdery mildew also thrives more on shaded leaves, so making sure your plants are in full sun and that they're pruned well will help. Now on to the monitoring and tolerance portion of our integrated pest management. If there's just a little powdery mildew on the lower leaves, but the rest of the plant is otherwise healthy, you may decide to tolerate it. But if you notice that it's getting worse or it's spreading from plant to plant, you may want to try the next course of action in integrated pest management. In this case, we don't really have a biological control, so we'll go right to chemical, a fungicide. There are a few fungicides that will work, and again, you should follow the directions on the label to make sure you're using it correctly. And as always, monitor the situation to make sure your treatments are working. These 3 situations are just examples to show you how you can use integrated pest management in your garden. And the cool thing is, if you have different pests and you want to learn more about what their IPM plan would be, there's an entire hotline of master gardeners that can help you. I'll put that information in the show notes. So, you may be thinking that integrated pest management seems like a lot of effort, especially when we have these pesticides that we can just spray on and be done. But there's a good reason that we don't want to use them: the environment. We've known about the effects of pesticides on the environment since at least the 1970s. By then, the United States was decades into using the extremely toxic insecticide DDT to control mosquitoes and the malaria that they can cause. And to its credit, the US did eradicate malaria in the US until recently, when it started popping back up. Don't get me wrong, malaria is bad, but so is draining wetlands and spraying everything with DDT. DDT is harmful to all sorts of creatures. It causes cancer in humans, and it stays in the environment for a really long time. One of the effects is that it killed most of the insects that hold up entire ecosystems. A lot of things rely on insects to survive. It also thinned out the shells of bird eggs. So when the birds sat down to incubate their eggs, they all just cracked. The nation's bird, the symbolic bald eagle, well, their population declined to fewer than 500 nesting pairs over the lower 48 states. And the bird songs that once filled forests disappeared in just a few decades. That silence was noticed by Rachel Carson, who wrote the book Silent Spring, calling for the end of DDT use in 1962. In the 1970s, the US finally banned the substance. Of course, we still have environmental issues. Our insect population is tanking. Our migratory birds are traveling in declining numbers, but our bald eagles? They are up to over 71,000 breeding pairs. DDT is kind of an extreme example of the negative effects of pesticides, but in all sorts of ways, they are still affecting the environment. One species often in the news in relation to pesticide use is the monarch butterfly. Their numbers are dropping alarmingly low, and one of the reasons is because of pesticides, both herbicides that kill off the monarch caterpillar's food source and insecticides that kill both the adults and the caterpillars. I wanted to learn more about monarchs and how we could help them, so last winter I met up with my youngest guest so far.
I'm Noah Raven. I'm 14 years old and I'm the founder of Monarch Defenders. I'm in 9th grade and I'm homeschooled by my dad, and we read lots of really interesting things about nature and environmental philosophy and ecology and stuff in homeschool, so it's really been sparking my interest in nature. I've been passionate for a long time now about protecting nature and the environment and stuff, and right now I'm very passionate about protecting the butterflies, and I'm an avid birder too, so I really like all natural things. I spend a lot of time in the Wissahickon Valley Park. Yeah, it's really nice. I go bird watching there a lot with my best friend too.
Born in DC, Noah has grown up most of his life in the Chestnut Hill neighborhood of Philadelphia.
Chestnut Hill and Mount Airy, it's one of the more greener sections of Philadelphia. There's lots of big trees. I really like the sycamores in our backyard. I think we dated them to like about 200 years old, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, and we actually have quite a lot of wildlife for an urban area actually. So we have neighborhood foxes that we really like, and in our backyard we've seen around like 60 species of birds, something like that. We get cardinals, blue jays, those are the common ones, but we've also seen some rare ones like pileated woodpeckers. Those are really cool, and there's a pair of great horned owls actually nesting over in the park over there. So yeah, those are really neat. A couple years ago, I traveled with my family to the Piedra Errada Reserve in central Mexico. It's an oil fir forest in the Sierra Madre Mountains.
The Piedra Errada Reserve is about 2 hours west of Mexico City. Up around 10,000 feet, the cloud forest is filled with the sacred oil mill firs that only grow at high elevations. They are sacred in Mexico because their branches are used in religious ceremonies. These forests have the perfect temperature and humidity, allowing these monarchs to preserve their fat reserves and stay hydrated through the entire winter.
It was a pretty steep mountain slope, so we actually had to ride on horseback, which was pretty fun. And then we got to the grove, and it was just filled with butterflies. Thousands and thousands of butterflies just like flying past us on the roads and stuff. There was just like the trees were like orange from like all the wings. It was just a really amazing experience. And there's where monarch butterflies from all over the central and eastern U.S. and Canada, they funnel through on the migration, and this is where they overwinter in Mexico. So we got to see so many butterflies. Yeah. The trees were like just covered. You couldn't really see them. You couldn't see them bark. It was just like just all orange wings. It was actually a little bit dull because the wings were closed up, but then when they started flying, they were more orange on the inside of their wings. So then when they started flying, it was just so orange, like the sky was just like filled with them. It's just really, really neat. After I started doing more research on the monarchs and learning about their unfortunate decline, and that's how I started Monarch Defenders. Yeah, I'll give you the lowdown on the monarchs. So there's quite a lot to say about the monarchs. They're my favorite animal. They're really interesting. They're the only butterflies in North America that migrate. So one of the things I think is pretty cool is that they have a solar compass.
In order to know where to go on their migration, the butterflies use the sun. But because the sun moves across the sky, they also have to know what time it is. In the morning, the sun is in the east, and in the evening, it's in the west. Their eyes detect the light, and their antennae run their circadian clock. And if they ever get confused, they'll just do a little spin in a circular motion to reset. But researchers are still trying to determine how they navigate on overcast days. And because their journey is long, there are sure to be some.
They fly over 2,000 miles from the central and eastern U.S. and Canada south to these overwintering groves in central Mexico, Sierra Madre Mountains, where my family went a couple years ago. And they complete the migration in multiple generations. So like 3 and 4 generations, I'd say, migrate north from Mexico. But actually only one generation, called, and it's nicknamed the super generation, migrates all the way south to Mexico. And they actually live quite a bit longer than the other generations.
In late February, the super generation starts the migration, traveling 50 to 100 miles a day. The eastern monarchs that we'll eventually see in Philadelphia land in Texas mid-March, where they lay eggs for several weeks. Eventually, their offspring will start to migrate mid-April, continuing the journey until June. This generation pretty much reaches the edges of the migration route, and there they lay their eggs. In 2 generations, these butterflies covered the United States and into Canada, some over 3,000 miles from their overwintering home in Mexico. The 3rd generation stays put for the most part, flitting around without a clear direction. But the 4th generation, it starts in Winnipeg, Canada at the beginning of August and ends in Mexico. They don't stop to mate or reproduce. Their mission is just to get to those oil mill forests, live through the winter, and make it back up to Texas the next year. The monarchs are the only butterfly known to make a 2-way migration.
But one of the most unique things about the monarchs is that the caterpillars exclusively rely on milkweed plants. So in case you haven't heard of this before, milkweed is a wildflower with milky sap, and it's native to tall grass prairies and meadows throughout North America. And the milkweed is actually toxic to most animals, but the monarch butterflies, in a process known as coevolution, have figured out how to get around the toxin sequestered in their bodies and actually be able to eat the milkweed.
Milkweed contains a cardenolon toxin that interferes with the way animal cells work. Typically, when your muscles contract, let's say your heart muscle, sodium or salt floods into the cells, causing an electric discharge and contracting the muscle cells, creating the heartbeat. But after that is done, the cell needs to reset so it can do it again. So the cells have a sodium pump that expels the extra salts. But the cardenolon toxin from the milkweed messes with the sodium pump, so the sodium never leaves, and it builds up more and more and more into the cell. The heart beats stronger and stronger until the animal goes into cardiac arrest. Monarchs and other insects that can eat milkweed have a different kind of sodium pump that the cardenolon toxin can't mess with. Not only can they survive the toxin, but they also store it in their bodies, making them deadly to other animals in the same way that the milkweed is. This all happens the whole time the caterpillars are feasting on the milkweed plants.
Then they go into the chrysalis. So the chrysalis stage, and that's one of the most bizarre things. So they go off the milkweed plant, they find like a stable place to make their chrysalis, and their bodies actually turn into goo, and they disintegrate all their tissues, and they form a new butterfly body inside the chrysalis.
As if turning your body into soup and reorganizing the parts into a new organism wasn't enough, in wilder news, researchers found that butterflies actually retain some memories from when they were caterpillars.
And then in a couple weeks, they emerge from the chrysalis. They pump their wings a little bit, and then they fly away. It's really cool. It's just amazing to see them. it was just pretty sad knowing that they were like on the road to going extinct, and so I just really wanted to help them. Monarchs in the last few decades have actually been doing really bad. It's really sad. Their migratory population has declined by between 80 and 90% since the mid-1980s.
Measuring the acres of Mexican forests that have monarchs overwintering, it's estimated that we lost 80% of the monarch population. While weather can greatly affect the butterflies year to year, the general trend from 1994 to 2004 has been going down.
There's like far less monarchs since my parents were kids. They're basically headed towards extinction if we don't take action and rebound this trend.
Like most threatened species, a combination of human actions are responsible for the decline in the monarch.
I would say this is mostly because of the widespread clearing of prairie habitat across the country, where they stop to get the milkweed and nectar plants and they lay eggs and stuff. It's shocking how little prairie we have left.
Over 99% of the original prairie grassland in North America is gone forever. In the United States, that means that only 5% of the 142 million acres that was still exists. So habitat loss is a major issue for the monarchs, not to mention other species that relied on that habitat. In addition, pesticides, as mentioned earlier, does a good job of killing both the monarchs and the milkweed that they rely on.
The prairies and meadows we actually do have face added pressure from invasive species. We can actually see this right here. So large areas of our supposedly naturalistic park are being taken over by invasive plants like porcelainberry, knotweed, Japanese honeysuckle, lesser celandine, like all those bad ones that have been really damaging our forests and meadows across the country. But the good news is that they're migratory insects, and so they don't need vast amounts of land, and so they don't need the whole prairie back like a larger animal like a bison or a mountain lion or something would. So I think that if we make the right modifications to our areas, monarchs are something that can be supported in urban and suburban areas pretty indefinitely if we choose to support them.
Creating a monarch rest stop is easy, and fortunately for us city dwellers, it doesn't require a lot of space. Ideally, you'd have 10 milkweed plants made up of a couple of species, but even a couple of plants will help. Swamp milkweed, butterfly weed, and poke milkweed are all good choices for our area.
Monarchs actually need two kinds of plants to live. So they need milkweed and they need nectar plants. The caterpillars are really picky eaters. They only eat milkweed plants, but the adult butterflies can nectar from the flowers of many different native plants, but they have to be like native prairie plants like sunflowers, coneflowers, goldenrod, stuff like that. And so they're pretty picky too because they don't like the common ornamentals like rose bushes and stuff.
So a combination of native milkweed and other pollinator plants is ideal because it sets up one stop where monarch adults can both lay their eggs and get a snack. And if you really don't have a lot of space, like most of us in the city, you can work with your neighbors, each putting out a few plants to create your pocket prairie.
You can also organize your community to plant a native meadow in a local park or reimagine a vacant lot. Or you can volunteer. There's lots of great local restoration programs that are trying to take out invasive species and help pollinators and monarchs and like the Schuylkill Center and the Friends of the Wissahickon, so you can volunteer in one of those programs. And there's really so many ways to get in touch with the land and save the butterflies, even if you don't really have a yard.
These small pocket prairies, or monarch way stations as some call them, can really make a difference to a migrating animal.
They actually just need regular stopping points on their migratory routes with enough milkweed and nectar plants to support them for their journey. And this is why local habitats, I like to call them pocket prairies, are a great positive solution to bringing back the monarchs. I started Monarch Defenders after our trip to Mexico in order to encourage people to take action to protect the monarch butterflies, and I created this website, and that has a whole bunch of information about how you can create a habitat to support the monarch butterflies in your backyard or community space. We actually have an interactive map on the website where people can upload their habitats and become true monarch defenders by planting a habitat. One of my big goals is planting native habitats myself, meadow habitats, pocket prairies for monarchs and other local wildlife, pollinators and stuff in my community.
Noah has been planting alongside Friends of Parks groups like those in the Wissahickon Park system nearby.
And we're trying to transform a half-acre plot of unused grass at this forgotten edge of the park into a pocket prairie for monarchs and other pollinators, so like native wildflowers and grasses, and we're going to make it like a whole native meadow. In the fall, I organized a meadow planting wink day, and we partnered with another teen environmental group called Gen Z for Sustainability. We planted around 200 native plants there, so milkweed, coneflowers, sunflowers, just all kinds of different native plants. And I'm really excited to watch the meadow grow and develop this coming spring and summer, so that'll be really neat. I realized that pocket prairies with native plants not only support monarchs, but they also are really essential for all the other butterfly species we have.
There are over 100 species of butterflies in Philadelphia County. Each requires a host plant for the caterpillars and a steady supply of nectar for the adults that potentially the pocket prairies provide.
It always feels very hopeful when I see another monarch caterpillar on a milkweed leaf, or when a few people have sent me emails saying that their habitat is actually winked and sent me pictures of the monarchs in there and stuff. Yeah, and that's really cool. And this year, I'm committed to really doubling down on local action and creating a pollinator oasis at the vacant lot.
Noah also worked with his family to create a children's book, Mona Monarch's Epic Migration. They hope to inspire other young folks to help in the plight of the monarch.
3 generations of our family actually worked on this together. So my grandma, my mom's mom, wrote the text of this about the monarch. So it's like a book designed for kids about the monarch migration. It's like a little story about this one monarch that migrates to Mexico and why it's important to save the butterflies and stuff. And then I helped draw a whole bunch of things with my brother and mom and dad. Yeah, and so we all worked on it together. It was a really cool family collaboration.
Due to efforts like Noah's, in 2025, the monarch population doubled from the year before, taking up 4.42 acres of oil mill forests in the Mexican winter. That's good news, but it's nowhere near the peak from the late 1990s of over 44 acres. We still have a long way to go.
Another piece of good news that just happened right now is that the Fish and Wildlife Service recently proposed to list the monarch as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, which, in case you don't know, is our landmark law for protecting endangered and threatened species. And this would give them a bunch of new protections. So like farmers and stuff would have to like maintain some prairie bordings so that the monarchs can get enough milkweed and nectar plants and stuff. But however, it has to go through a period of review over the next year. And so I'm worried that the new administration, which obviously has very different views on the environment and in the past cut back a lot of our environmental laws, might not like that and could decline the listing. So that's something to be worried about. But regardless, it's still a really great signal that the monarchs really need help, and countless other species, really, pollinators especially, and that the fight is on to protect them.
So even if you can't support monarchs with pocket prairies, you can help them through your vote and writing to your elected officials. And as an extreme backup, scientists have started researching how to artificially inseminate female monarchs with frozen sperm collected from males. But let's not let it get to that. Now's the perfect time to start your pocket prairie or volunteer with local groups to help preserve their habitat.
Monarchs usually come back up through our area in Pennsylvania in June. They build up at the end of June and then they build up in July. So there's more and more monarchs coming to the Pennsylvania throughout the course of the early summer. Then like August, I would say, is the peak time. So like multiple generations lay eggs on the milkweed and they go through the life cycle here. And then in September, we actually get another influx of monarchs because all the ones in southern Canada and New England actually migrate through the mid-Atlantic south to Mexico. So there's another influx in September. So that's a good time to see them. And actually in Cape May, it's pretty famed for the bird migration, but actually a really neat thing about that is that the monarchs also funnel through Cape May for their migration too. So we actually went this past fall, and in one morning we counted over 100 monarchs. It's really great, seeing the change that you've brought into the world. It's really hopeful, when you have local actions that you can do and see the change that you brought into the world.
That was Noah Raven, founder of Monarch Defenders. If you want to learn more about how to become a defender yourself, visit monarchdefenders.org. I'll put that information and a link to Mona Monarch's epic migration in the show notes. Okay, now for one of your gardening questions. I recently led a community gardening workshop and folks had a lot of great questions. Okay, drainage question. So her question was that she is using a kitchen sink as a container. Great idea, because you can use anything as a container for your plants. They tend to need drainage. Drainage is very important. And even if you're growing on concrete and you have a raised bed, this happened to me on my sidewalk garden. I put out a container that was flush against the sidewalk, and it did have drainage, but the flush against the sidewalk part wasn't letting the water out. So I had to end up putting it up on bricks. You need to make sure that the water is going out. And if you're seeing that your plants are sitting in a lot of water, like after a big rain, or the soil starts to stink, that's a real good sign that there's like something bad going on in there, and you want to check out the drainage. So yeah, I might drill out a hole if you can. Making sure your soil and planters have appropriate drainage is an easy way to make sure that your plants are healthy. If you have any gardening questions of your own, you can email me at grittyandgreen@coolgoonproductions.com. Okay, that's all for this episode of Gritty and Green. Thanks so much for joining me to learn about integrated pest management and how you can control the critters you don't want in your garden while making sure all the ones that we do want thrive. And a special thanks to Noah Raven from Monarch Defenders for teaching us all about monarchs and reminding us that you're never too young or old to start changing the world. And even little actions can make a big difference. If you're liking this podcast, please subscribe, rate it, recommend it to your friends. It really helps me to continue to do this work that I love. I'll be back soon for an all-new episode of Gritty and Green. Gritty and Green is presented by Green Philly in collaboration with Cool Goon Productions. It was written, directed, and edited by me, Meredith Nutting. Theme music by Kazuya. If you want more information about local sustainability, go to greenphl.com.